poor girl was wrongly imprisoned, yet her husband chose to marry a heartless woman. Imagine being a young woman, deeply in love, with dreams of building a happy home beside the man you trust more than anyone, and then, in one cruel moment, watching it all shatter. She was innocent, yet dragged away in chains, branded a criminal, locked behind cold prison walls. Her heart ached not only from injustice, but from betrayal, because while she fought to survive, the husband she adored abandoned her. And worse, he chose to marry another woman. Not just any woman, but one with a heart of stone, a woman who took pleasure in watching her suffer. For years, this poor girl carried the weight of lies, humiliation, and loneliness. But what no one expected was that the truth would not stay buried forever. This is the heartbreaking, powerful story of love, betrayal, and the fight for justice. A story that will test your heart, shake your soul, and remind you that even in the darkest prisons, hope can still rise. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comments section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The story begins not with a celebration nor with laughter, but with the sound of iron gates clanging shut. Clara's hands trembled as the heavy prison doors closed behind her, swallowing the last sliver of sunlight she had clung to for hope. She was just 24, a woman of fragile beauty and pure heart, yet fate had painted her as a criminal. Her crime? Not theft, not murder, not betrayal, but being in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with enemies powerful enough to twist her innocence into guilt. The courtroom still echoed in her mind. She had stood there pleading with tears streaming down her face. "I swear I didn't do it. Please, you must believe me." But her words had fallen on deaf ears. Her accusers were wealthy, influential, and merciless. Their lies were polished, their evidence forged. The judge, unmoved, sentenced her to years behind bars. Yet what hurt Clara the most wasn't the cold walls of prison. It wasn't the rough straw mattress or the bitter bread. It was the thought of her husband, Daniel, the man she loved more than life itself, the man who had once vowed, "No matter what happens, I'll stand by you." She had clung to that vow when the gavel struck. She had whispered it to herself as the guards dragged her away. And now, standing in a prison cell that smelled of rust and despair, she repeated it like a prayer. "Daniel will come. He'll believe me. He'll fight for me." Days passed, then weeks. Clara waited. Every footstep in the corridor made her heart leap, thinking it might be him. Every visiting hour, she prayed his face would appear beyond the glass. But Daniel did not come. Instead, Clara's only companions were the whispers of other inmates. Women hardened by life, whose stories of betrayal and abandonment cut deeper than the prison chains. "You think your husband will wait?" One woman scoffed, her voice bitter with experience. "Men don't stay. Not when freedom tempts them. Not when a prettier, richer face comes along." Clara shook her head fiercely. "No, Daniel isn't like that. He loves me. He knows I'm innocent. He'll fight for me." But inside, doubt began to gnaw at her heart. Outside those prison walls, Daniel was indeed fighting. At first, he had knocked on lawyers' doors, spent sleepless nights poring over documents, and begged the authorities to reconsider Clara's case. His love was true, but his strength was fragile. The pressure was immense. Clara's accusers didn't just want her in prison, they wanted Daniel broken. They spread rumors, poisoned his reputation, and stripped him of business opportunities. Neighbors whispered, "How could he be married to a criminal?" His friends turned cold, distancing themselves. And then she appeared. Melissa, the woman who would become Clara's replacement. Melissa was everything Clara was not: wealthy, powerful, untouchably elegant. She was the daughter of one of the very men who had orchestrated Clara's downfall. She had always wanted Daniel, wanted his gentle smile, his hard-working nature, his loyalty. And now that Clara was behind bars, Melissa saw her chance. At first, Daniel resisted. He clung to memories of Clara, of her laughter in their small home, of her hand brushing his cheek when life was hard. But Melissa was cunning. She played the role of savior, offering him comfort when he was drowning in despair. "Daniel," she whispered one evening, "you've suffered enough. Why tie yourself to a woman who will never come back? You deserve freedom. You deserve happiness. You deserve me." Her words were poison wrapped in honey. Slowly, Daniel began to falter. Loneliness carved into his soul, and doubt whispered louder than Clara's vows. And then one day, the news reached Clara like a dagger to the heart. From behind the iron bars, she heard two guards gossiping. "Did you hear? Daniel, the husband of that prisoner in cell 14, he's engaged to Melissa Montgomery. The wedding is next month." Clara's world shattered. She pressed her hands against the cold stone wall, her chest heaving as tears burned her eyes. "No, no, it can't be true. Daniel wouldn't. He promised me." But the truth was undeniable. The man she loved, the man she trusted, the man she prayed for every night, was choosing another woman. And not just any woman, but the very heartless soul who had rejoiced at Clara's imprisonment. The night of the wedding, Clara sat on her narrow bed, staring through the barred window at the distant glow of the city lights. Somewhere beyond those walls, Daniel was saying, "I do" to someone else. The other prisoners mocked her. "So much for true love, eh?" one sneered. "Your husband found himself a new queen while you rot in here." But Clara didn't reply. She couldn't. Her heart was too broken, her voice too weak. She simply sat in silence, tears streaming down her face, her hands clutching the locket Daniel had once given her. Inside it was a picture of the two of them, smiling in happier days. "Why, Daniel? Why did you give up on me?" she whispered. That night, Clara made herself a silent vow. If the world had abandoned her, if even her own husband had turned away, she would not break. She would survive this prison. She would endure the humiliation, the loneliness, the despair. And one day she would walk out of those gates free. And when that day came, the world would know the truth. Clara was not guilty. She was wronged. She was betrayed. But she was not broken. And so begins the journey of Clara, a journey of heartbreak, resilience, and the cruel betrayal of a love she thought eternal. But what Clara didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her story was only just beginning, because fate, though cruel, was not finished with her yet. The thorns of betrayal prison was meant to break Clara. The daily routine of misery, the tasteless food, the constant surveillance, the hopelessness etched into every corner. It was a place designed to crush both body and spirit. But for Clara, the real torment wasn't the cell or the chains. It was knowing that outside those walls, her husband had chosen another woman. Each day she rose with a heavy heart. Each night she lay awake, haunted by memories of Daniel's smile, his promises, his love. And every time she remembered the guard's words, "He's married to Melissa Montgomery now," her chest tightened until breathing felt like a punishment. The other women in the prison had learned to bury their pain. They hardened themselves, built walls around their hearts. Clara, however, could not. She carried her pain openly, her tears staining her pillow, her silence screaming louder than any words. Some mocked her weakness, others pitied her. But one woman, an older inmate named Grace, took her under her wing. Grace had been in prison for nearly 2 decades. Her face was lined with sorrow, her hands rough with labor, but her eyes held wisdom born of suffering. "Don't waste your tears on him, child," Grace said one night, as Clara wept quietly. "If he chose another woman while you rot in here, then he was never yours to begin with." Clara shook her head. "But he loved me." "I know he did. I saw it in his eyes. I felt it in every touch. He promised he'd never leave me." Grace gave a bitter laugh. "Promises are easy when life is sweet. It's when storms come that you see who truly stands beside you." Those words pierced Clara's heart. She wanted to argue, to defend Daniel, to believe in the man she had loved so fiercely. But deep inside, a tiny voice whispered that Grace was right. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Daniel's life was changing rapidly. Melissa had gotten what she wanted. She was Mrs. Daniel Rivers now. The grand wedding had been the talk of the town, a dazzling affair dripping with wealth and power. Everyone praised her beauty, her elegance, her charm. To outsiders, she was the perfect wife. But behind closed doors, Melissa's mask slipped. She was not gentle, not loving, not kind. Her heart was as cold as the diamonds she flaunted. "Why do you look so sad, Daniel?" she sneered one evening as they sat in their luxurious mansion. "Still thinking about her? That criminal you once called your wife?" Daniel flinched at her words. "Don't call Clara that. She's not—" Melissa's eyes narrowed, sharp as knives. "She is a criminal. The world believes it. The court declared it. And you," she jabbed a manicured finger at his chest, "you're mine now. You will forget her. Do you understand?" Daniel fell silent. His once strong spirit had grown weary under the weight of guilt and manipulation. He knew deep down that Clara had been wronged, but he lacked the courage to defy Melissa, whose family's power loomed over his every decision. In the darkness of night, when Melissa slept soundly beside him, Daniel would sit awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories of Clara haunted him, the way her laughter filled their tiny home, the softness of her hand in his, the purity of her love. But then guilt would crush him. Guilt for betraying her, guilt for marrying the very woman tied to her downfall. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself Clara would never come back. He told himself Melissa's wealth and influence were the only way to survive. But no matter how much he tried to silence it, a single truth echoed in his soul. He had abandoned the woman who loved him most. Back in prison, Clara received her first and only letter from Daniel. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper, her eyes devouring every word. "Clara, I don't know how to begin. Forgive me, for I have failed you. I tried to fight, I swear I did, but the world was against us. Your accusers were too powerful, and I was too weak. I begged, I searched, I fought until I had nothing left. And then, I gave up. I married Melissa. Perhaps it was selfishness. Perhaps it was survival. I don't know anymore. Please don't hate me. Please know that a part of me will always love you." The letter slipped from Clara's hands, falling to the cold prison floor. Her chest ached as if a blade had been driven through her. He had admitted it. He had married Melissa. And yet he dared to ask her not to hate him. For hours, Clara sat in silence, staring at the letter. Part of her wanted to rip it to shreds, to scream and curse his name. Another part of her wanted to clutch it to her chest, to believe the words, "A part of me will always love you." But in the end, she did neither. She simply folded the letter and tucked it into her locket, alongside their picture. It was all she had left of him, and she could not bring herself to let it go. Melissa, of course, was not satisfied with merely taking Clara's husband. She wanted Clara's spirit broken completely. One day she arranged for a visit to the prison. When Clara was called to the visiting room, her heart leapt, thinking it might be Daniel. But when she saw Melissa's face, her blood ran cold. Melissa sat gracefully, her eyes glittering with cruel delight. "Well, well," she drawled, her voice dripping with mockery. "Look at you, Clara. Locked up like the criminal you are, while I sit beside your husband every night." Clara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "Why are you here? Haven't you taken enough?" Melissa leaned forward, her smile sharp. "I came to see the woman who lost, to see the pitiful creature who thought she could keep Daniel forever. But you were wrong, Clara. He's mine now. And you'll rot in here until you're nothing but a memory." Tears burned Clara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She met Melissa's gaze with quiet strength. "You may have him now, but deep down he knows who truly loved him. And one day, Melissa, one day the truth will come out." Melissa's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Truth means nothing when you're behind bars. Remember that." And with that, she left, her laughter echoing cruelly in Clara's ears. That night, Clara lay awake in her cell, her heart heavier than ever. But somewhere within that pain, a spark of determination ignited. She realized then that she could not depend on Daniel. She could not wait for justice to come from others. If she wanted freedom, if she wanted her name cleared, she would have to fight for it herself. Grace, noticing the fire in Clara's eyes, nodded approvingly. That's it, child. Don't waste your life crying over what you lost. Fight for what you deserve. Prove to them all that you are not what they say you are. For the first time in months, Clara felt strength stirring within her. Her love for Daniel had kept her alive, but it was her will for justice that would set her free. Little did she know, the path ahead would be filled with thorns. But Clara was ready. She had been broken, betrayed, humiliated. But she was not defeated. Sparks of truth. Clara had grown accustomed to the rhythm of prison life. The clang of the morning bell, the endless chores, the whispers of broken women who had resigned themselves to their fate. But Clara was different now. The fire that Grace had seen in her eyes grew stronger with every passing day. The pain of Daniel's betrayal still burned, but it no longer chained her. Instead, it became her fuel. If she could not win back her husband, then she would at least win back her dignity. She would prove the world wrong. One evening, while scrubbing the prison's laundry room floor, Clara overheard two guards talking. Their voices were low, but Clara's ears sharpened like a hawk's. "The Montgomerys sure pulled strings to get that girl locked up," one guard muttered. "Shh! Don't say that out loud," the other hissed. "Do you want to lose your job?" Everyone knows the Montgomerys made the whole case up, but no one dares cross them. Clara froze, her hands trembling against the soapy water. The Montgomerys, Melissa's family. Her heart pounded. This was no longer just suspicion. She had always felt the trial was unfair, but now she had confirmation. Her imprisonment had been orchestrated by Melissa's powerful family. That night, Clara whispered to Grace what she had heard. Grace nodded grimly. "I've seen it before. Rich families destroying anyone who gets in their way. But hearing something and proving it are two different things." Clara clenched her fists. "Then I'll find proof. I don't know how, but I will." Outside the prison, Melissa's reign over Daniel was far from blissful. At first, Daniel had convinced himself he had made the right choice. Their home was luxurious, their lifestyle enviable. From the outside, he looked like a man who had moved on, who had chosen a brighter future. But Melissa was not the wife Clara had been. She was demanding, manipulative, and cold. She criticized Daniel for the smallest things, belittled him in front of others, and flaunted her control over him like a trophy. One evening after Daniel returned home late from work, Melissa's voice sliced through the air. "Do you enjoy making me wait, Daniel? Or were you thinking of her again?" Daniel sighed heavily. "Melissa, please. Not every moment of my life is about Clara." Melissa's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Don't say her name in my house." Daniel looked away, guilt weighing on him like chains. But no matter how much he tried to bury it, Clara's memory refused to fade. The contrast between her gentle love and Melissa's harsh cruelty was unbearable. He often found himself replaying old memories. Clara cooking in their small kitchen, Clara humming softly while folding laundry, Clara's eyes lighting up when he walked through the door. Those simple moments, which had once seemed ordinary, now felt like treasures he had carelessly thrown away. And every time Melissa's sharp words cut him, he wondered if he had sold his soul for comfort that felt like poison. Back in prison, Clara's resolve only grew. She began asking questions quietly, carefully. She learned that one of the witnesses in her trial, a man who had sworn he saw her commit the crime, was rumored to have been paid off. She also discovered that the supposed evidence against her had come directly from a Montgomery-owned company. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape. But gathering whispers was not enough. She needed real evidence, something undeniable. One day, while working in the prison library, Clara stumbled across an article in an old newspaper. Her breath caught in her throat as she read. It was about the very night she had been accused, the theft she supposedly committed. But the article mentioned something peculiar. The Montgomery family had mysteriously profited from the incident. Clara's mind raced. Of course, they didn't just want me imprisoned. They wanted to protect themselves or gain something from framing me. Grace watched Clara's face pale. "You found something, didn't you?" Clara nodded slowly. I think this goes deeper than I imagined." Meanwhile, Melissa's cruelty reached new heights. At a lavish party thrown by her family, she paraded Daniel around like a prized possession. Her laughter was loud, her grip on his arm tight, her whispers venomous. Smile, Daniel. You're my husband. People need to see how perfect we are. But Daniel could no longer keep up the charade. That night when they returned home, he confronted her. Why do you treat me like a trophy, Melissa? I'm a man, not an ornament for your parties. Melissa's smile turned icy. Don't forget who you are, Daniel. Without me, without my family's money, you'd be nothing. Do you think anyone in this city respects you? They only tolerate you because you're mine. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, to tell her she was wrong, to confess that he still loved Clara. But fear held him back. The Montgomerys had destroyed Clara with a snap of their fingers. What would they do to him if he defied them? And so he stayed silent, suffocating under the weight of a loveless marriage. Clara, however, was finding her voice. She began writing letters, letters she knew might never leave the prison, but she wrote them anyway. Letters detailing her innocence, the corruption of the Montgomery, the truth she was beginning to uncover. She sent them to lawyers, to journalists, to anyone she thought might listen. Most went unanswered, some were returned unopened, but Clara did not stop. Her persistence began to draw attention. One young lawyer, a man named Edward Blake, received one of her letters. At first he dismissed it. After all, prisoners often claimed they were innocent. But something about Clara's words struck him, the clarity of her reasoning, the quiet desperation woven into every sentence. He decided to look into her case, and what he found disturbed him. The evidence was thin, the witnesses suspicious, the trial rushed. Edward's instincts told him there was more to the story. I don't know if you're truly innocent, Mrs. Rivers, he muttered to himself as he sifted through the documents. But I know this case stinks. Back in prison, Clara began to feel a glimmer of hope. She didn't know yet about Edward Blake, but she sensed that her determination was not in vain. The truth had a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how deeply buried. One night as she sat by the small barred window, she whispered to herself, they can steal my freedom, they can steal my husband, but they cannot steal the truth. And one day the world will see it. Grace is sitting beside her, smiled faintly. That's the spirit, child. Don't let them win. You're stronger than you know. Clara closed her eyes, holding her locket tightly. She no longer prayed for Daniel's love. That part of her heart was too wounded to heal. Instead, she prayed for justice, for freedom, for the strength to rise again. Outside, Melissa grew restless. She could sense Daniel's heart slipping away, even though he never spoke of it. She noticed the way his eyes darkened when she mocked Clara, the way he fell into long silences when the subject of the past arose. One evening, as they dined in their grand home, Melissa leaned close and whispered coldly, if you ever think of going back to her, even in your dreams, I'll make sure she never sees the light of day again. Do you understand? Daniel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the full cruelty in her eyes. In that moment, a seed of rebellion planted itself in his heart. He didn't know how, he didn't know when, but he realized he could not live like this forever. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew Clara's story was not finished. Glimmer of justice. The prison library had become Clara's sanctuary. In those walls lined with dusty books, she found not only knowledge but a fragile sense of peace. Each book she read sharpened her mind. Each article she uncovered fueled her determination. But on one ordinary afternoon, something extraordinary happened. A guard approached her cell with a folded note in his hand. Letter for you, he grunted, sliding it through the bars. Clara's heart skipped. Most of her letters were ignored or returned unopened. She snatched the paper with trembling fingers and unfolded it quickly. Mrs. Rivers, my name is Edward Blake. I am a lawyer, and I have reviewed some details of your case. I believe there may be grounds to reopen it. If you are willing, I would like to meet with you and discuss further. Clara pressed the letter to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in what felt like eternity, someone believed her. Someone was listening. When Edward arrived at the prison a week later, Clara could hardly breathe as she was escorted to the visiting room. She expected another disappointment, another closed door. But as she sat across the glass and saw Edward's steady gaze, she felt a fragile hope flicker inside her. Edward was young, no older than 30, with sharp eyes and a seriousness that made him look older. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Mrs. Rivers, I've read your file. There are holes in it, gaping holes. The witnesses were unreliable, the evidence shaky at best, and the speed of your trial," he shook his head, "it was unnatural. Someone wanted you silenced quickly." Clara's hands trembled against the cold glass. "It was the Montgomerys." "I know it was them. I just don't know how to prove it." Edward leaned forward. "Then let me help you. I can't promise victory, but I can promise I won't abandon you." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. Her throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted. Someone who wouldn't give up on me." Outside the prison, Daniel's world was unraveling. Melissa had grown bolder in her cruelty, no longer bothering to hide her contempt. She criticized his every move, controlled his every decision, and mocked the man he once was. One evening, Daniel returned home late again, exhausted from work. Melissa stood waiting in the foyer, her arms crossed. "Where were you?" she demanded. "I told you," Daniel sighed, loosening his tie. "Work ran late." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "Work, or were you daydreaming about your precious Clara again?" Daniel froze, his jaw tightening. "Why do you always bring her up?" "Because I know you, Daniel," Melissa sneered. "I see it in your eyes. You're haunted by her. You think I don't notice? You think I don't know you still love her?" Daniel turned away, his silence answering for him. Melissa's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Pathetic. You think she's some angel, but she's nothing. She's a criminal. And I—" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I made sure she stayed that way." Daniel's head snapped up. "What did you just say?" Melissa's eyes glittered with malice. "You heard me." For a split second, her mask had slipped. She realized it too late, quickly covering with a mocking smile. "Oh, don't look so shocked. Do you really think her downfall was an accident? My family made it happen. And you," she jabbed her finger at his chest, "you married into the winning side." Daniel staggered back, as if struck. His blood ran cold. He had always suspected Clara's trial was unfair, but hearing Melissa confirm it made him sick to his core. His wife, the woman he had betrayed, had been innocent all along. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Melissa's words echoed in his mind. He tossed and turned, guilt clawing at his chest. He saw Clara's tear-stained face, her desperate pleas for him to believe her, and his own cowardice in abandoning her. For the first time in years, Daniel wept. "What have I done?" he whispered into the darkness. Meanwhile, Edward's investigation deepened. He visited old witnesses, dug into financial records, and combed through archives. What he uncovered was staggering. One key witness, the man who had sworn Clara committed the crime, had suddenly bought a house far beyond his means right after the trial. Another piece of evidence supposedly linking Clara to the theft had originated from a company owned by the Montgomerys. Every stone Edward turned revealed more corruption. When he returned to the prison weeks later, Clara leaned forward eagerly as he spoke through the glass. "Mrs. Rivers, I believe I have enough to file an appeal. It won't be easy. The Montgomerys are powerful, and they'll fight to keep you silenced. But I think we have a chance." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blake. I've dreamed of this moment for so long." Edward gave a small smile. "Call me Edward. And don't thank me yet. We still have a long road ahead." But Clara was already clinging to that fragile hope. For the first time in years, the prison walls didn't feel so suffocating. Outside, Daniel struggled with his guilt. He began to avoid Melissa, retreating into long walks and late nights at the office. He couldn't bear to look at her, not after her confession. Every time he saw her smug smile, he heard Clara's voice crying, "I didn't do it. Please believe me." He wanted to scream, to tear down the walls of his gilded cage, but fear still held him back. Until one evening, he overheard Melissa on the phone. Her voice was sharp, angry. I don't care what it takes. Make sure that lawyer doesn't get far. Edward Blake, yes. Handle it. Daniel's blood ran cold. Melissa knew about Edward, and she was already moving to destroy him. The next morning, Daniel made a choice. For the first time in years, he defied Melissa. He sought out Edward Blake. He found him outside his modest law office carrying a stack of files. "Mr. Blake," Daniel called out, his voice trembling. Edward turned, frowning slightly. "Do I know you?" I'm Daniel Rivers." Clara's husband Edward's eyes hardened instantly. "Ex-husband, from what I've heard?" Daniel flinched at the words but nodded. "Yes, and I know I don't deserve her forgiveness. But I came to warn you. Melissa, she knows about you. She's planning to stop you." Edward studied him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "I figured as much. Powerful families don't like their skeletons dragged into the light." Daniel swallowed hard. "Listen, I know I failed Clara. I betrayed her. But she's innocent, Mr. Blake. I see that now. I was blind before, but not anymore. If there's anything I can do to help..." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying you're willing to testify against the Montgomerys?" Daniel hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes. But then he thought of Clara, sitting in her cell, broken and betrayed because of his weakness. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." That night, Clara sat by her small window, clutching her locket. She didn't know that far beyond those bars, Daniel had finally taken his first step toward redemption. She didn't know that Edward's case was growing stronger by the day, but she felt something stirring in the air, a shift, a change. For years, she had lived in darkness, but now for the first time, she dared to believe that dawn might finally be coming. Chains began to crack. Clara had long since stopped counting the days. Time inside prison blurred into endless sameness, where each sunrise looked identical to the last. But lately she found herself marking nights with a piece of chalk against the wall of her cell. Not out of despair, but hope. Edward Blake's visits filled her with strength. Each time he came, he brought news. A new witness doubted, a forged record uncovered, another thread in the tangled web of lies pulled loose. Clara could feel it. The truth was inching closer, like light creeping into a darkened room. Grace, her constant confidant, noticed the change. "You smile more these days," she remarked one evening. "Something's shifting in you." Clara touched her locket. "I feel, for the first time in years, that maybe I'll breathe free air again." Grace gave her a bittersweet smile. "And when that day comes, child, don't waste it. Don't let the world break you again." Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Daniel and Edward formed an unlikely alliance. Their first meeting had been tense, but necessity forced them together. Edward had determination and evidence. Daniel had knowledge of the Montgomery secrets, and perhaps most importantly, guilt that drove him like a whip. "You realize what you're risking?" Edward asked as they sat in his office, papers spread across the desk. "Testifying against the Montgomerys could ruin you. They'll come after you with everything they have." Daniel's eyes were tired, shadowed by sleepless nights. "I've already ruined myself. I abandoned the woman who loved me, and I married into the family that destroyed her. If this is my chance to make it right, then I'll take it." Edward studied him, then gave a curt nod. "Very well. But know this. We're walking into a storm, and storms don't spare anyone." Melissa, however, was not blind. She noticed Daniel's absences, his secretive behavior, the way he avoided her gaze. Her suspicions sharpened into fury. One evening, she confronted him. "Where do you go, Daniel?" she demanded, her voice icy. Daniel met her eyes, his jaw set. "Out! Away from you!" Melissa's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Careful. You're forgetting who you're talking to. Without me, you'd be nothing." Daniel's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "I'd rather be nothing than live like this." Melissa's eyes narrowed dangerously. For the first time, she saw true defiance in him, and she hated it. Edward's investigation gained momentum. He discovered that one of the judges involved in Clara's trial had received a mysterious donation from the Montgomery family just weeks before the verdict. He unearthed documents proving that the evidence used to convict Clara had been tampered with. Piece by piece, the picture became clear. Clara had been framed, silenced to protect the Montgomerys' interests. But the Montgomerys fought back. Witnesses were threatened, documents disappeared, and Edward's office was broken into one night, his files rifled through. When he told Clara about it during his next visit, she felt both fear and determination. "They're afraid of you," she whispered through the glass. "That means you're close to the truth." Edward nodded grimly. "Closer than ever. But we'll need more. We'll need someone from the inside willing to speak out." Clara's heart clenched. She knew exactly who that person had to be. "Daniel," she whispered. Edward nodded slowly. Yes, he could be the key for Daniel. The weight of his choices grew heavier each day. He couldn't shake the memory of Melissa's confession, the cruel pride in her voice, as she admitted her family had orchestrated Clara's downfall. He found himself wandering to the old part of town, near the modest home he had once shared with Clara. The house stood abandoned now, its windows dusty, its garden overgrown. Daniel stood at the gate, memories flooding him. Clara humming while hanging laundry, her warm smile when he returned from work. The scent of her cooking filling the air. Tears burned his eyes. "I traded this for wealth and emptiness." That night, Daniel made his choice. He would testify. When he told Edward, the lawyer's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "Once you step into that courtroom, there's no turning back. Melissa's family will destroy you." Daniel's voice shook, but his resolve was steady. "They've already destroyed me, but they won't destroy Clara again. Not if I can help it." Edward reached across the desk, offering his hand. "Then let's finish this." Together back in prison, Clara prepared herself for what was coming. She knew Edward was fighting for her. She knew Daniel was wavering on the edge of redemption. But she also knew the Montgomerys would stop at nothing to keep her silenced. At night she prayed, not for Daniel's love, not anymore. That wound was too deep, too raw. She prayed for strength, for justice, for freedom. Grace, ever watchful, placed a hand on her shoulder one evening. "You've changed, child. When you first came here, you were broken. Now you look like a woman ready to rise." Clara smiled faintly. "I don't feel broken anymore. Hurt, yes. Betrayed, yes. But not broken." Grace's eyes softened. "Good." Melissa, meanwhile, sensed the storm closing in. Her spies told her Edward was building a case. Her suspicions about Daniel grew sharper, and her fury grew darker. One night, as she stood before the mirror, adjusting her jewels, she whispered to her reflection, "They think they can bring me down. They think they can free her, but I will crush them all." Her eyes glittered with cold fire. "Clara will rot forever. Daniel will crawl back to me, and Edward Blake will regret ever crossing the Montgomerys." But fate at last was turning. Edward filed a motion to reopen Clara's case. It was risky, dangerous, and uncertain, but it was a spark of hope. The court agreed to hear it. Clara sat in her cell the day the news came, her hands trembling as the guard read the notice aloud. For a moment, the world seemed to spin. "Reopened?" she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "After all these years?" Grace hugged her tightly, her rough voice breaking with emotion. "It's happening, child. You're going to have your chance." Clara pressed her hands to her chest, whispering a silent vow. "I will not waste this chance. I will prove the truth. I will walk free again." That night in his grand but loveless mansion, Daniel sat alone in the dark, staring at a photo of Clara he had hidden away all these years. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the silence. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'll fight for you now. I'll fight until the end." And somewhere deep inside those prison walls, Clara felt it, the chains of injustice beginning to crack. The heavy clang of iron echoed through the prison as guards let her out. But this time, she wasn't walking to a punishment cell. She was walking toward the courthouse, toward a second chance. Her wrists were bound in cold steel cuffs, yet her spirit burned with fire. The air outside tasted different, sharp, alive, filled with possibilities. As the prison van rumbled through the city, Clara stared out at streets she hadn't seen in years. Life had gone on without her, but now perhaps it was ready to welcome her back. When they arrived at the courthouse, Clara's heart pounded in her chest. The building loomed large, its stone pillars tall and unforgiving. Yet this time, she didn't feel crushed beneath them. She felt ready. Edward Blake was waiting for her inside. He gave her a firm nod as she was escorted to the defense table. "Remember, Clara," he whispered, "this is your moment. You don't have to prove your worth. You already have it. All we have to do is prove the truth." Clara nodded, her hands trembling as she sat down. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters scribbled notes. Photographers adjusted their cameras. Everyone wanted to see the woman once branded as guilty stand trial again. And at the front row, Melissa Montgomery sat in her finest dress, her lips curled into a confident, poisonous smile. Beside her sat her powerful father, their presence radiating intimidation. Clara's eyes flicked toward them, but she did not cower. She lifted her chin, silently daring them to look at her. Melissa smirked, mouthing the words, "You'll lose." But for the first time, Clara felt no fear. The trial began. Edward stood tall, his voice calm yet commanding. He laid out the case, the inconsistencies in the evidence, the suspicious financial gains of the Montgomery family, the paid-off witnesses. Each word chipped away at the fortress of lies that had trapped Clara for years. Then came the first witness, a man who had once testified against Clara. His hands shook as he took the stand, sweat glistening on his forehead. Edward's questioning was sharp. "Mr. Harris, did you or did you not receive a large sum of money shortly after your testimony in the original trial?" The man stammered. I, I don't remember." Edward slammed down the document. "This bank record says otherwise. Do you deny this deposit of $50,000? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Mr. Harris paled, his voice breaking. They made me do it. The Montgomerys, they told me to lie." Gas filled the room. Melissa's face twisted in fury, but she quickly composed herself. Clara's heart raced. The truth was clawing its way out. But the most powerful moment came when Daniel took the stand. The judge called his name, and Daniel rose slowly, his hands shaking as he walked to the witness stand. Every eye in the room followed him. Every camera flashed. Melissa's eyes narrowed like daggers. How dare he? Daniel sat, his throat dry, his palms damp. When Edward began questioning, Daniel's voice trembled at first. "Mr. Rivers," Edward began gently, "you are the husband of Clara Rivers, correct?" Daniel's gaze flicked to Clara. Her eyes, hurt, fragile, yet unbroken, met his. His chest ached with guilt. "Yes," he said quietly, "I am her husband." Edward nodded. "Did you believe she was guilty when she was first sentenced?" Daniel swallowed hard. "At first, no. I knew in my heart she was innocent, but I let fear and pressure and lies cloud my judgment. I abandoned her when she needed me most," his voice cracked, "and for that, I will never forgive myself." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's stern face softened slightly. Edward pressed on. "Mr. Rivers, do you have knowledge of the Montgomery family's involvement in this case?" Daniel's hands clenched. He looked straight at Melissa. "Yes, my wife was framed. Melissa told me herself. Her family made sure Clara went to prison so they could protect their own interests." Gasps erupted again. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Melissa shot to her feet, her voice venomous. "Lies! He's lying. He's just a bitter man trying to crawl back to his pathetic little wife." The judge's gavel slammed again. "Mrs. Montgomery, sit down or you will be removed." Melissa's face burned with rage as she sank back into her seat, her nails digging into her palms. Clara watched Daniel with tears streaming down her face. For years she had dreamed of him standing up for her. For years she had prayed he would remember the truth. And now, though it came late, it was here. Finally, it was Clara's turn to speak. Her legs shook as she rose, her chains clinking softly. She walked to the witness stand, the weight of the entire courtroom pressing down on her. But when she spoke, her voice was clear, steady, and filled with quiet power. "I was branded a criminal," she began. I was called a liar, a thief, a disgrace. I lost everything, my freedom, my dignity, my husband. But I never lost the truth, because the truth was always that I am innocent. She paused, scanning the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. The judge listened intently. The Montgomerys thought they could bury me behind bars forever. They thought no one would believe me. But here I stand, years later, still fighting. Not because I'm extraordinary, but because I refuse to let lies win. Her eyes flicked to Melissa, her voice hardening. You may have taken my husband, my home, and my years, but you did not take my soul. And today the truth is rising. Tears blurred her vision, but she held her head high. I only ask for justice, not revenge, not pity, just justice. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with emotion. Even hardened reporters wiped their eyes. Edward smiled faintly, pride in his eyes. Melissa, however, was seething. Her fist clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. She leaned toward her father, hissing, "Do something! Stop this!" But for once, even her father looked uneasy. The fortress they had built for years was crumbling, and the world was watching. As the day ended, the judge announced a short recess before deliberations. Clara was escorted back to her holding cell within the courthouse. Daniel approached Edward in the hallway, his voice hoarse. "Do you think it's enough?" Edward exhaled slowly. "It's more than enough. But the Montgomerys won't go down without a fight. We have to be ready for their last strike." Daniel nodded, determination in his eyes. "Then let's be ready." In her private chambers, Melissa paced like a caged beast. Her perfect composure had shattered, replaced by raw fury. "They think they've won," she hissed, "but I'll make sure Clara never breathes free air again. If I have to drag her to hell myself, I will." Her father's voice was grim. "Careful, Melissa. This is slipping beyond our control." Melissa's eyes burned. "Then I'll tighten my grip. Clara Rivers will not walk free." But outside, in the corridors of justice, the tide had already turned. The truth was too strong, too loud, too undeniable, and soon Clara would face the verdict that could change her life forever. Perfect. Now we've reached the climax of Clara's journey. We'll witness the verdict, Melissa's desperate last move, and Clara's fate finally being decided. This is where all the emotion and suspense come together. That hung over the room. Clara sat at the defense table, her chains removed for the hearing, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest as the judge re-entered and the jury filed back in. Edward leaned close, his voice low but steady. "Whatever happens, Clara, remember this. You fought, you spoke, you stood tall. That alone is victory." Clara nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. The judge banged his gavel. "This court will now hear the jury's decision." The foreman, a stern-looking woman, stood with a sheet of paper in her hand. She cleared her throat, her voice echoing in the silent room. "In the matter of Clara Rivers, accused of theft and fraud, we the jury find—" She paused, the weight of the moment pressing heavily. "Not guilty." The words seemed to hang in the air, almost unreal. Then the courtroom erupted in gasps, cheers, and shouts. Clara's breath caught in her throat. For a moment she sat frozen, unable to comprehend. Then tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she whispered, "Not guilty. I'm free." Edward placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes glistening. "Justice, Clara." At last. But while the courtroom celebrated, Melissa's world collapsed. Her face twisted with rage, her nails digging so hard into her palms that blood appeared. She shot to her feet, her voice shrill with fury. "No! This isn't over. She's guilty. She'll always be guilty." Reporters turned their cameras toward her, flashes exploding. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in the court!" But Melissa was beyond reason. She lunged toward Clara, her voice a scream of venom. "You think you've won? You think you can take back what's mine? I'll destroy you." Guards rushed forward, restraining her as she thrashed wildly. Clara stood, her legs trembling, but her voice calm and steady. "You already destroyed me, Melissa. But the truth rebuilt me stronger. and nothing you do can take that away. Melissa spat curses as she was dragged from the courtroom, her reputation crumbling before the eyes of the press. The Montgomery name, once untouchable, was now stained with scandal. After the chaos settled, the judge turned to Clara. "Mrs. Rivers, you are free to go. This court apologizes for the years lost to injustice. May you find peace." The words struck her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Free. After years of darkness, she was free. As she stepped out of the courtroom, the cameras flashed, reporters shouting her name. Clara shielded her face, overwhelmed. She wasn't ready for the world's attention. She only wanted air, space, the feeling of freedom. Edward stayed close, guiding her through the crowd. "One step at a time, Clara." Just one step at a time, Daniel waited outside, his heart in his throat. When he saw Clara emerge, his breath caught. She looked fragile yet radiant, tears glistening on her cheeks, chains replaced by freedom. "Clara," he whispered. She froze, her eyes meeting his. For a long, silent moment, they simply stared at each other. Years of pain, love, betrayal, and loss hung between them. Daniel's voice trembled. "I'm so sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I swear, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Part of her longed to fall into his arms, to believe in the love they once shared. But another part, hardened by years of betrayal, held her back. Her voice was soft but steady. "I believed in you once, Daniel, with everything I had, and when I needed you most, you weren't there. That broke something in me." Daniel's face crumpled with pain. "I know. I failed you, but please, give me one more chance." Clara shook her head gently. "Maybe someday I'll find it in my heart to forgive you. But right now, I need to find myself again. Not as your wife, not as a prisoner, but as Clara." Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears. He nodded slowly, accepting the weight of her words. "Then I'll wait, as long as it takes. Even if it's forever." Clara gave him a sad, faint smile. "Then let it be forever." And with that, she turned and walked past him, her steps unsteady but free. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to rebuild her life. She stayed with Grace's family, who welcomed her warmly after Grace's parole. Edward continued to support her, not as a lawyer but as a friend, reminding her that healing was a journey, not a destination. The press hounded her for interviews, painting her as the woman who beat the Montgomerys. But Clara shied away from the spotlight. She didn't crave fame.